Last week was a sad time for anybody in America who believes in the basic tenet that justice is blind, that everybody in America is going to get equal treatment, regardless of who they are. We saw from the very beginning of this trial that Alvin Bragg did not want to just target somebody based on criminal wrongdoing. He wanted to target somebody based on who they were. That's how he actually campaigned. Talk about somebody beginning their campaign with a bias, saying he was going to go after people, to use the weight of government to target his political opponents. Now, we know that happens in third world countries. That cannot be the norm in the United States of America. And I think that's what disgusted so many people, Republican, Democrat, Independent, that disagreed with not only the verdict, but the fact that the case should have never been brought to trial. And so when you see this weaponization of government against political opponents, starting at the top with Joe Biden, allowing his agencies to go after political opponents, encouraging Democrat DAs, conflicted judges. We've heard all the stories, the reports, a judge that donated to the campaign of Joe Biden. Talk about a conflict of interest, whose own daughter was making millions of dollars off of the trial. And yet here we are. This cannot be the new norm for the United States of America. And as Donald Trump said, he's going to fight this thing not only for himself, but for every American who could be the next person that they go after. And so this Republican majority is going to continue to go and look into the weaponization of government. We have committees obviously aggressively pursuing that, continuing to get transparency, bringing in witnesses. But we also are bringing legislation. You're going to see in the appropriations process us look at the funding of some of these agencies. You're going to also see policies that are going to be coming forward to address the abuses of power that we've seen. And so this is going to be something that continues. I know my colleague Juan Ciscomani talked about the open southern border, and we've all been talking about the perils of Joe Biden's policies, as today he tries to throw out another fig leaf to try to distract people from the failures of his own policies. I think most people in America now know Joe Biden, with a pen, could fix the problems that he created, and he chooses not to. He doesn't want to fix the problem. In fact, he actively opposed the bill that we passed through this House, H.R. 2, that would have actually secured America's border. He wants it to be open. But you just saw a couple of days ago yet another glaring example of the failures of the Biden open border policy. And that's when 2 more New York Police Department officers were shot by someone here in this country illegally. How many times is Joe Biden going to allow this kind of criminal activity in the United States by people here illegally that he's let in the door to injure cops, to kill people like Lake and Riley, before he actually works with Republicans to do something about it? Because ultimately the voters will have a say on November 5th in all of these issues. But if you look at the bill we brought forward just a few weeks ago, imagine this. We had a bill on the House floor that said any illegal who assaults a police officer in the United States of America is immediately deported. Do you know that almost 70% of Democrats voted against that bill? And then just a few days ago, 2 NYPD cops are shot by someone here illegally. And they don't want that illegal criminal to be deported. It's unbelievable how far left their party has gone. It's unrecognizable to most people in America. But again, that's what's at stake on November 5th. And then you turn to what we're doing this week, standing up for our military veterans, bringing bills, as we heard from, that are going to be really important to make sure that our veterans have the tools and resources they need when they come home after defending our freedoms, so that they're properly taken care of, with the Milcon VA bill, and then, of course, the ICC bill, the rogue radical actions of the International Criminal Court going after Prime Minister Netanyahu with no justification. We're going to be pushing back on that. Initially, the White House was supporting that effort, and now they've walked away because their radical left in their own party does not any longer support the Jewish state of Israel. Well, we surely do, and we're going to be standing up for Israel and against radical actions like the ICC this week as well. With that, the leader of our party, the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. Well, thank you, Whip. It is great to be back. And even more importantly than that, it is great to be in remission from cancer. It's been a long battle, about 6 months long, but God answers prayers, and there have been a lot of prayers. And thank everybody for the support and prayers along the way. And you surely don't get through this alone. But I was looking forward to coming back, and now it's great to be back. It's great to see all of you. Happy Valentine's Day to everybody, especially happy Valentine's Day to my wife, Jennifer. So she's back home. But I tell you what, we got right into the business of what this Congress and especially what this majority has done, and that's taking our job seriously and doing the tough work. We brought back up the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas. I want to thank Blake Moore for giving us the opportunity to reconsider the vote. And him procedurally making sure we had that opportunity so that we could send a statement once again that we, this House Republican majority, care about border security. And in a town where everybody should be concerned about what is one of the biggest crises facing our country, the fact that we've had millions of people come across our border illegally, including people on the terrorist watch list, drug dealers from Mexico, the cartels having operational control of our southern border, to the point where they're bringing drugs in that are killing 150 young people in America every single day. That should matter to everybody, especially the President of the United States, and especially the Secretary of Homeland Security, who, as Chairman Green's committee, did a methodical job of pointing out over months and months of building this case that this secretary has failed to do his job. He's let down the American people. And the American people want a secure border. And people have asked, what's the point of impeaching the secretary if the Senate's just going to discard it? I don't know what the Senate's going to do. I gave up predicting what the Senate might do. But I will tell you this. If the Senate just discards this, like they do so many other important issues, like H.R. 2 that we sent over 6 months ago, where we came together as a Republican majority and passed the toughest border security package that we've ever seen come out of Congress, at least since the 1980s. And the Senate won't even take that bill up. The Senate can't even pass their own bill. And if they ignore this and just throw it in the trash can without taking it as seriously as the American people do, then there will be accountability and consequences to that action. So it's on the Senate. They have to do their job. But the good news is this House Republican majority, as razor thin as it is, once again did our job. We are going to fight to secure the border. We've got a speaker who continues to call on President Biden, and I'm sure he's going to talk about this, to just sit down and meet to talk about this major crisis. The president cares about all these other things going on around the world, as we do too. But if you don't care about one of the biggest crises facing our country, to the point where the president won't even sit down with the Speaker of the House to talk about ways to solve this problem, when we've laid out a number of different options, not just laid them out, we passed them, which is not easy to do. We're going to take this seriously, as we have for months and months, and continue to focus on those needs of the American people, even if this president and his administration refuses to. One other issue that we're going to be bringing up this week, and there's others, FISA is going to be a big fought-out issue tomorrow, but on Friday, it was talked about earlier, August Pfluger's bill on the LNG exports. When President Biden, just a few weeks ago, said he was going to ban LNG exports in America, all that does is embolden our enemies around the world. If he does it because the far left extremists on the left and environmentalist groups are threatening him and saying, stop supporting fossil fuels in America. I don't know if the president knows this or not, but let me tell him, if it's not the first time he's heard it, I sure hope it's not the first time he's heard it. There is nobody in the world that produces energy cleaner and more efficient than the United States of America. And stop attacking American energy, Mr. President. Because when we make energy, we do it better than anybody else in the world, and it allows us not only to lower prices here at home for families who are struggling, but it also allows us to send that energy to our friends around the world. And when President Biden takes that energy off of the market, that just means countries like Russia and Iran become more emboldened, because those countries still need that energy. We still need that energy. And when he shuts down LNG exports, it also stifles production in America. That kills jobs here at home. And again, the cleanest place to produce energy in the world, and it raises prices on families who are struggling. Why on God's earth would you want to do that? We have a bill to reverse that ridiculous, crazy, insane policy, and we're going to have that vote on Friday as well. So we're going to keep doing our job here in this majority, and the guy leading the way is our Speaker, Mike Johnson. It's disturbing to see the Senate Majority Leader attacking our strongest ally in the Middle East, Israel, at this time of war. You go back to October 7th, and you watched Hamas commit barbaric acts of murder against Israelis, murdering Jews, murdering babies, taking hostages, some that are still held today. And as hostages are still being held in Israel, who we have always stood by and supported their right to defend themselves as a Jewish state, is under attack, to have Senate Majority Leader Schumer attacking the democratically elected leadership of Israel is disgraceful. And the fact that he won't give that same kind of criticism to Hamas, to Iran, who continues to support terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah and others who want to do harm to people who believe in freedom around the world, starting with our ally Israel. The United States, since the formation of the Jewish state of Israel, has always stood by our ally. And in fact, there's really been no daylight between our two countries for a long, long time. It is sad to see that in Washington, the Democratic Party is starting to fracture and move away from that. Needs to stop. They need to look in the mirror and recognize who our friends are and who our enemies are. And if you can't tell the difference, you don't have the responsibility to lead. That's what's at stake here. Senator Schumer owes an apology to the people of Israel who elected their leadership. But keep in mind, this is the same man who stood on the steps of the Supreme Court and threatened them. This isn't a time for games. This is a time to stand with your friends who are under attack and show no daylight between the United States and Israel. The House Republican leadership continues to show that. We passed a bill to give Israel the aid that they need, and Senator Schumer won't bring that bill to the Senate floor. We're going to continue to stand with Israel in their right to defend themselves against terrorists like Hamas. With that, I'm going to bring up. Thank you, Whip. Tomorrow, on the same day and in the same chamber where Joe Biden will be giving his State of the Union address, the House will be taking up the Laken Riley Act. We'll be debating and passing a bill to confront yet another crisis that Joe Biden himself created, a crisis that has had devastating impacts on families like Laken Riley's. I want to commend Mike Collins and Barry Loudermilk for working with Laken Riley's family, who were devastated, as you can expect, at the loss of their daughter. A completely unnecessary tragedy that was created because Joe Biden opened the southern border. And every community in America is seeing crime, murders, devastation at the hands of people coming here illegally and doing harm to our citizens. I've seen it in my own backyard in Kenner, Louisiana, just a few days ago, where a 14-year-old girl was raped by someone here illegally because Joe Biden opened the southern border. How many more families will have to suffer before Joe Biden finally admits his mistake and corrects what he did? We passed a bill. This House came together and passed H.R. 2, a bill that actually would secure our border. We worked with our Border Patrol agents and others. And everybody knows what needs to happen. When Joe Biden went to the border just a few days ago for a photo op, he had an opportunity to reverse his own damage that he created through executive action. He could have ended catch and release. He could have worked to restore the Remain in Mexico policy that was so effective under President Trump. It was a negotiated agreement. It takes a little work to call a foreign leader and make sure you're doing everything you can to protect your country. But that's Joe Biden's job, and he is failing on every front. He could do it with a pen. He says Congress needs to act. Well, then he should ask the Senate to pass H.R. 2, a bill that would actually solve the problem, not make it worse, as we've seen in some of the other bills floating around the Senate. But again, Joe Biden could do this on his own because he created this problem with his pen. Is he going to look tomorrow night into the eyes of Laken Riley's family and every other family in America and say he's going to do everything in his power to stop this invasion? Millions of people on the terrorist watch list that have come into our country because he opened the border, and he can close the border, but he refuses to do so. So when you look at all the crises Joe Biden's created on so many fronts, economic crisis, energy crisis, foreign policy crisis, where our allies are on fire and our enemies are running roughshod over other nations. When he talks about a reset, is it going to be more empty rhetoric, or is Joe Biden finally going to work with Republicans to solve these problems? We stand ready, just like we will be taking up and passing the Laken Riley Act tomorrow. This House has acted every time there's been a crisis and worked on solutions to fix those problems. And the leader at the forefront of that effort is our Speaker, Mike Johnson.
New York's recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Yield 1 minute to our friend from Louisiana, Representative Scalise.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise in strong support of this bill. But, Mr. Speaker, for years now, this House Republican majority, and before we were a majority, have been calling on President Biden to secure America's border. We have been trying to engage President Biden in a negotiation to fix the problem. We've put together legislation, and H.R. 2 has been mentioned by many, many people, the strongest border security bill that has passed Congress. And it's been over in the Senate since last year. And they continue to ignore it because they have chosen to ignore the problem. You saw it play out just days ago in the Senate when we sent over articles of impeachment for Secretary Mayorkas, who has failed miserably in his job of protecting America's homeland. That's his job. He is the Homeland Security Secretary, and you've seen him here on Capitol Hill testifying that our border's secure. It would be laughable if it wasn't so insulting to millions of Americans who know that's a lie. Our border's not secure, and in fact, since Joe Biden took office and took actions to open up our border, we've seen millions come across. Is it 8 million? Is it 10 million? The number we know is at least that high, if not higher. We know people on the terrorist watch list have come into our country because we've caught some of them, but we haven't caught all of them. We see thousands of Chinese nationals of military age coming into our country. Now, do you think they're coming in here to help be a part of the American dream or coming to undermine it? We know the answer to that question, too, which is why we continue to press our colleagues on the other aisle, our colleagues in the Senate, and, of course, Joe Biden in the White House to get serious about this issue, but they refuse to. We're not going to let this go. We're going to continue to bring this up. Mr. Scalise brought this bill forward, and we will continue this debate. And if President Biden wants to ignore it, he knows, and the American people know, that President Biden has the legal authority today through executive action to secure the border because they watched him use that same executive action to open up the border. He ended Remain in Mexico, which we restore in this bill. He mandated catch and release on our Border Patrol agents who want to secure our border. You talk to them. We've embedded with them. So many of us have gone down the border and embedded with our Border Patrol agents. And, Mr. Speaker, they will tell you what's wrong. And the things that are needed to fix and secure the border are in this bill. But President Biden doesn't want to fix it because he knows he can fix it with a pen today. He's chosen not to because the far left elements, the radical elements of his party want an open border. And they're clear about it. And the president tries to act like he wants to secure the border, but then when it comes time to actually negotiate, he's nowhere to be found. The voters ultimately of this country are going to have a say in November. Do they want a secure border or not? Because you've got a clear choice. When Donald Trump was president, we had a secure border, and he took those steps. Mexico didn't want remain in Mexico to be the policy at the time. That was asylum, by the way, which is what we're really talking about. It was President Trump who went back to Mexico and said, either you're going to agree to this policy, it's a negotiation between two countries, or there's going to be consequences. And he laid out those consequences. Well, lo and behold, Mexico saw the light. Mexico recognized it made a lot more sense to agree to that policy with President Trump than to suffer the consequences. And so we got Remain in Mexico, and it started to solve the problem. And then he ended catch and release. He was building wall. We funded this when we were a Republican majority working with President Trump, funded construction of the wall, and hundreds of miles of wall were being built. Joe Biden comes into office, and on day one, he mandated the halt of that construction of that wall. The wall was working, and Joe Biden knows it, and he ended it because he wanted the border open. And so step by step, action by action, Joe Biden's opened the border. He refuses to negotiate with us on fixing the problem, but we're not going to walk away from this. We're going to continue to force this issue, to bring votes to the floor, to press the Senate to take this up. But at the end of the day, if Joe Biden still wants to continue to block this, he still wants to continue to keep the border open, the voters are going to have the ultimate say in November. And I don't think he's going to like the answer. He could do something about it right now, and he refuses to. So ultimately, the people of this country will have a say if Joe Biden won't work with us, but we're going to continue to push it. I urge adoption of this piece of legislation that's so important to our national security, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Whip. We have another busy week on the floor, and of course it starts with the contempt of Merrick Garland. And then my colleagues have talked about this is something that we have been trying to get the facts out for months and months. Merrick Garland knows what the rules are. He issues subpoenas himself, and he doesn't let the person that he's issuing the subpoena to decide whether or not they want to comply. And yet that's what he said. He said he just doesn't think that this is something that he has to comply with. Well, with all due respect, Mr. Garland, this is not your decision. Congress has a constitutional duty to perform oversight, which is what we're doing. We're in the middle of an impeachment inquiry, which, as Chairman Jordan pointed out, has been voted on by the House already. And now we need to get the facts. You look at the White House themselves, they've acknowledged that as they've turned over the transcripts, those transcripts have been edited. Well, there's one way you can find out what the edits were, and that is to actually get the source tape, get the audio. That's the only way we're going to know what was really said. We know already by the White House's own admission that the transcript does not reflect what was said. It's only the audio that does, which is why we need to get the audio tape. And clearly there's no executive privilege. Otherwise, as been pointed out, they wouldn't have turned over the transcript in the first place. But they've done it. But they've also acknowledged that they've edited the document that they turned over to us. Now we need to get the source document, which is the audio, and that's why we're moving forward. We're also taking up the NDAA, as Mr. Alford talked about. Really, really important that we send a message to our men and women in uniform that we're going to give them all the tools necessary, not only to keep our country safe, but to make sure that they and their families have the things that they need so they don't have to be on food stamps, for example, to increase their base pay for the entry-level men and women in uniform and all the branches of the military, to make sure that we're focused properly on China and the threats that are posed all around the world. Look, the world's a more dangerous place than it's ever been. We saw that again this morning with the arrest of eight ISIS fighters here in the United States because Joe Biden opened up the southern border. If anybody wondered, and we've been saying this for years now, that because Joe Biden opened up the border, at some point our country will be at risk and our national security is undermined. And it was pointed out yet again with 8 ISIS fighters caught. How many more terrorists are in our country because Joe Biden opened up the southern border, pre-positioned in cities around this country, getting ready to do us harm? So it just goes to show you the world is a very dangerous place. We need to make sure we have the tools. We ought to be working with the president to secure our southern border, but the president doesn't want to secure the border. In fact, under his own executive order, he's going to let another 1 million people in a year without ending the policies that are drawing people here illegally. We passed a bill, H.R. 2, that would fix this problem, and Joe Biden still to this day opposes that bill. After 8 ISIS terrorists were captured in America, Joe Biden still opposes the bill that would secure America's southern border. So it's very clear he does not want to solve the problem. You know, somebody is that does want to solve the problem? That's Donald Trump. President Trump had a secure border. He's going to be here tomorrow, and I'm sure we're going to hear about some of those things that we're all trying to work on together to get our economy back on track, to secure our border, to make sure our military is focused on the things that need to be done to get this country back on track. So we're going to continue working to address these problems. I will finish with this. You know, we had an opportunity, about 60 House members over the last week to go to Normandy and pay tribute to the brave heroes who stormed the beaches of Normandy. So many lost their lives that day. And you can see the cost of our freedom when you're on that beach and you see the grave sites. But we also got to see something that was incredibly inspiring. That was about 135 of those men who are still alive, who came back to Normandy. And you want to talk about a special moment to be able to meet and greet and thank those 135 brave men for their service. And some of them were in their hundreds. The youngest one I met was 97 years old, and they all were recounting stories of that day. And then the French president, President Macron, went one by one. He selected a few of them to give the Chevalier de Legionnaire, one of France's highest awards, to a number of those brave heroes. And he cited the things that they did. And again, these are American heroes who went to another country not to conquer, but to liberate, to restore freedom to the French people who were under Nazi regime. And he pinned each one of them individually. And to see, they were all in wheelchairs, and to see them get out of their wheelchair because of the pride, they did not want to sit down while the French president was presenting those medals. And it just showed you why they're called the greatest generation. And it was an unbelievably moving moment. And I know we have a lot of things around here that we talk about the battles and the fights amongst ourselves, but that was a time where the country came together and people did extraordinary things. And it just proves America can do those kind of things when we put our minds to it. Hope you all come out to the baseball game tonight. The Republicans play the Democrats. We have over 25,000 tickets sold and exceeding the record. Over $2 million raised for local charities. A lot of local youth groups will benefit. We're the reigning champs, and we want to continue to hold that mantle. But you're going to see a spirited competition tonight. Hope to see y'all there. I know somebody will be out there because he was at practice this morning, was our speaker, Mike Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Later today, the House is going to be making a very historic and important vote. And that's whether or not we continue to stand with Israel. Whether we're going to ensure that the Biden administration follows through on their promise to deliver the weapons that in many cases Israel already paid for. Just think about that. Many of the weapons that President Biden is holding back right now are weapons that Israel paid for months ago. In some cases, things that they paid for before Hamas actually invaded Israel. And right now, while they're at war, and whether President Biden completely understands the severity of this war or not, the people in Israel surely do. The duly elected leadership in Israel understand that they're in a war that they have to win. They have to eviscerate Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, which is funded and supported by Iran. Now, while President Biden is impeding the ability for Israel to defend themselves, Iran's not holding back. You saw them fire over 300 drones and missiles into Israel. Hamas is not slowing down. Hamas, by the way, still has over 130 hostages, including American citizens. Where is President Biden caring about the lives of those American citizens that are being held hostage right now in tunnels under Gaza? And he's supporting, President Biden is supporting Hamas's position against Israel? This is disgusting. And Chuck Schumer is going to hold this bill up. I think the public pressure, when this bill passes with a bipartisan vote today through the House, the public pressure will grow so large that Chuck Schumer will have to take this bill up. And if this bill does pass the Senate, like some other bills that President Biden threatened to veto, that he ultimately signed, because the public finally had enough. This is one of those cases. Because this is a time for choosing, as the Speaker said. And the choice is very clear. Right now, there is a war going on between Israel and Hamas. And if you're not supporting Israel, you're supporting Hamas, a terrorist organization. And so when President Biden said he wants to hold back on those arms sales, he is holding back on Israel's ability to go and fight a war against Hamas. The only other person that really wants that is Hamas. Why would President Biden choose that side? Well, today on the House floor, every member of Congress is going to have the opportunity to make that choice. This House majority leadership on the Republican side has been crystal clear from the beginning. We support Israel in their right to self-defense. They are under attack from a terrorist organization, and they will defend themselves. They have a right to defend themselves, and they're going to have our support in that right to self-defense. We will have Israel's back, and we're going to see who else does when the vote happens later today. And then we send that bill over to Chuck Schumer, and he's going to have to make a decision. He can give a bunch of hot air and rhetoric today, but when that bill comes over to the Senate, there's going to be a lot of other people, I think, that are going to have a say in whether or not he sits on that bill and sides with Hamas or else supports Israel. With that, I want to bring up our whip, Mr. Tom Emmer.
Thank you, Whip. We just had a great, resounding speech by President Trump. And if you look at the applause, standing ovations, a lot of, as Elise said, a lot of unifying messages from President Trump, but also optimistic messages. President Trump talked a lot about what we need to do to get our country back on track, spent a lot of time talking about securing America's border and why that's so important to our national security. Talked about the fact that we have Russian warships off of our coast right now, off of America's coast, because of Joe Biden's weakness and the difference between strong leadership and President Trump. President Trump talked a lot, too, about how to get the economy back on track and reduce inflation for those families who are struggling. All across America, families can't afford to buy groceries, can't afford to fill up their cars because of the failed policies of Joe Biden. And President Trump talked about what we can do working with a Republican Congress to fix these problems in January, but it all starts November 5th. And we are incredibly unified in working with President Trump to get him elected so that we can work with him to fix these serious problems that our country faces. And President Trump gave a great tribute to our speaker, Mike Johnson.
He's failed in his job and, misled Congress on a number of occasions. And the border is a major crisis that has to be addressed by this president, by Secretary Mayorkas, and he fails to do his job.
Now, when do we send over the articles of impeachment?
I haven't talked to the speaker, but obviously we want to move it quickly. So,
I mean, the Senate's not here right now, so yeah. I mean, you don't anticipate this until next week or whenever the Senate comes back.
Right, but I would imagine it'll be passed over quickly to them, and they hopefully take it up quickly.
What if the Senate dismisses this rather quickly? It's a Democratic Senate.
Well, the Senate really ought to take seriously the message that was sent is that we're serious about securing the border, and the Secretary's failed to do his job. And the American people are disgusted by it. The American people don't like it. Having a wide open border where people from on the terrorist watch list are coming over, human trafficking is going on, drugs are being brought in to the point where we're losing 150 people who are dying every single day from fentanyl. I mean, it's a major crisis.
But will Republicans use that as a weapon against Democrats to say if they dismiss this trial really quickly, they don't take this seriously, they have to restart?
They ought to take it seriously because the American people think and recognize that it's a major crisis in our country that we have a wide open border and this secretary's failed to do his job and has been derelict in his duty and has misled Congress on some very serious issues. And so we take it seriously.
Thank you, Whip. Well, the Democrat Party proved last week that they have absolutely no respect for their own voters. They literally jettisoned throughout the votes of 14 million Democrats who went to the polls to select Joe Biden as their nominee and went behind closed doors where party bosses pulled the will of their voters and replaced Joe Biden with Kamala Harris. Now, it begs the question, let's look at Kamala Harris's record as vice president. She's still the sitting vice president, but she's also been the architect of many of President Biden's worst failures. not the least of which is her main responsibility that she's been given in 3.5 years, that is the job of border czar. When President Biden tapped her to be the border czar, it took her months to even get out to the border. She said many times that the border is secure. Everybody in America knows that's a lie. In fact, it's the largest crisis in America, affecting every community throughout this country, with drugs, with opioids that are killing about 150 Americans every day, bringing in criminals to every community in America. And Kamala Harris has been responsible for this epic failure. In fact, she's called for open borders. What else has she called for? Good luck if she goes to Pennsylvania and talks about her energy policies where she wants to ban fracking. She has been against American energy her whole career, while allowing foreign countries like Russia and Iran to put billions of dollars into their pockets, selling their energy around the world, while crushing American energy and the jobs that go with it here at home. We all know what Kamala Harris did raising money for the Minnesota Freedom Fund when radicals were out protesting and ultimately getting arrested, attacking cops, doing other things. She's shown disdain over and over again, saying we need to rethink policing, embracing the defund police movement. That's Kamala Harris's record. She is far to the left of Joe Biden, and we know the failures of the Biden-Harris administration all too well. That's going to be a problem they're going to continue to have. They hold nobody accountable for their failures, and unfortunately the American people are the ones who pay the price. We laid out a really strong alternative at our convention in Milwaukee. I was proud to be there with our other leaders here, and what we saw is an incredibly unified Republican Party with a clear and focused agenda. President Trump laid it out himself, as did all the other speakers, talking about what we will do to help those families who are struggling under the weight of this radical Biden-Harris administration that's led to record inflation, higher costs at the grocery store, at the gas station, discord all around the world. Kamala Harris couldn't even find the time to go greet Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday when he arrived in the United States. And in fact, Vice President Harris is boycotting tomorrow's speech by Prime Minister Netanyahu. That's disgraceful. Why will she not come and show support for our greatest ally in the Middle East while they're at war from terrorist organizations funded by Iran? These are the kind of questions that they're going to have to answer. And finally, when you watched that hearing yesterday with Secret Service Director Cheadle, I think everybody in America knows she's not up to the job. And it's an important job. It's a job where the main mission is to protect presidents and former presidents in the United States with a zero-fail mission, as Mr. Langworthy talked about. And not only did she fail, but she actually lied to us and the American people multiple times just in the last 10 days. We had been hearing for months that President Trump's team was denied additional Secret Service protection that they had asked for. And what did we hear from the Secret Service director? A vehement pushback. They said, no, that's not true. For days, they said it wasn't true. They didn't just ignore what we were saying. They actually said it wasn't true. And then the day before, Director Cheadle comes before the Oversight Committee where she has to testify at the threat of perjury. They all of a sudden leak out the truth. And that is that, yes, in fact, the Secret Service Director Cheadle did deny the Trump team additional Secret Service protection. Why did she lie to the American people and members of Congress for about a week about such an important detail? She talked about the inability to protect the roof where the shooter positioned himself. She said it was too high of a pitch. And then yesterday you had Carlos Jimenez, a colleague of ours, 70 years old, on the roof just walking around saying, look at this. This is not difficult to maneuver. She lied about that, too. She has no credibility to the point where literally Republicans and Democrats are united calling on her to step down. This is not an entitlement position she has. She works for the American people, and she failed in her mission. Joe Biden needs to remove her if she doesn't have the self-respect to step down. And we're going to continue to push for that as well. Now I'd like to bring up the man who's leading our charge, and that is Speaker Mike Johnson.
Recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank my friend from North Carolina for yielding. And it's so important that we have this debate on the floor and that we pass the Laken-Riley Act. It would be more significant if later tonight, in this very chamber, if Joe Biden joined us and said that he was going to finally take action using the same pen that on day one when he became president, he used to undo all of those actions that were securing our border, if he would say he's going to reverse those actions. He can work to restore the Remain in Mexico protocol, getting us back to a functioning asylum process. He could take direct action with his own pen, no act of Congress, to end catch and release, so that when people come here by the millions as they have, they're not just allowed to go into the interior of our country, where we don't even know where they're going. Governors can't tell you how many people have come into their states illegally, where they're showing up. You see it in cities where they're showing up and they're shutting down schools and gymnasiums to house people. This is out of control, and Joe Biden created the mess. He could solve it. But short of Joe Biden solving it, the House has taken multiple actions to address it. This Republican House came together last year to pass H.R. 2, a bill designed to actually secure America's border. Taking all of those necessary actions, whether the president wants to or not, but doing the things that it takes, working with our Border Patrol agents to secure America's border so that we don't have what we've seen, at least 8 million people that have come across illegally. And when you look at some of the devastating consequences, Laken Riley is just one example. And I pray for her, and I pray for her family. No family should have to go through what Laken Riley's family is still grieving with today. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, this is not even an isolated incident. It's happening over and over again in communities all across America ever since Joe Biden opened our southern border, allowing millions of people to come in. You're seeing countries emptying out prisons to send people here. People on the terrorist watch list, over 140 that we know of on the terrorist watch list that have been detained. How many that we don't know of that haven't been caught, that are here in America planning to do us harm because Joe Biden opened the southern border? There are serious negative consequences to those actions that Joe Biden took. When you think about Kenner, Louisiana, a community in my backyard, part of which I represent in my district, just days ago, a 14-year-old girl was raped by someone here illegally. You saw just recently a 2-year-old murdered by someone here illegally. How many more communities are going to have to suffer? How many more families are going to have to be victims before Joe Biden admits this problem and then works with us to solve it? Not passing a bill like they tried to in the Senate that actually makes it worse, that codifies things like catch and release, that gives over $1 billion of your taxpayer money to fund lawyers for people here illegally. Yes, that was in the Senate bill that even the Senate didn't pass after all of that hoopla about a bipartisan coalescence. They didn't even pass that bill once they read it. The House did pass a bill to solve this problem. Today we're coming together to pass another bill here with the Laken Riley Act to solve this problem. But the worst part of it is this problem should have never happened if Joe Biden didn't take the steps he took with a pen to open this southern border. He could close it himself. He chooses not to. We came together and said, then we'll close it, Mr. President, and he issued veto threats on those bills because he wants an open border. But does he want the consequences too? Will he look those families in the eye and tell them enough is enough and apologize to them? He could do that tonight from that podium. I sure hope he does. But in the meantime, what he really needs to do is work with us to end this madness, to secure America's border, get back to a functioning legal system of immigration in America, like every other country has, so that we don't see this endless flow that's devastating communities all across America. Let's pass the Laken Riley Act, and hopefully there will be no more examples like Laken Riley in the future. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you.
Whip.
It's interesting to watch the Democrats right now expressing disdain over Joe Biden's performance at the debate. Let's be clear, first of all, the reason so many people are recognizing that Joe Biden did so poorly is because President Trump did so well in the debate. President Trump actually articulated how we can get this country back on track, how we can get back to a place where under President Trump we had a secure border that we no longer have. We had low interest rates where people, a first-time home buyer, could actually afford to go buy their first home, which we don't have today. You could go to the grocery store and actually buy all the things you needed for your family and still have a little money left over to fill up your car because gasoline was less than $2 a gallon. President Trump knows we can get back to those days, and that's what President Trump talked about. And then the President Biden that so many people saw, frankly, is the same Joe Biden that we've been seeing for the last 3.5 years. The White House has been trying to cover up for a lot of his failures. But everybody up here in this town that's interacted with the president has known for years that this is the Joe Biden that we've all seen. And then the whole American public got to see it on display at the debate. In fact, if you go down the hall right now, the Democrats are literally behind closed doors talking about jettisoning, throwing out the votes of 14 million Democrat primary voters who chose Joe Biden to be their nominee. Think about that. The party that loves lecturing people about democracy is in a smoke-filled room trying to throw out the democratically chosen nominee for president by the Democrat voters. 14 million of them said they want Joe Biden to be their nominee, and Democrats are openly talking about discarding all of those votes and picking somebody else behind closed doors. No wonder when you look at all the Democrats that are abandoning Joe Biden, that he opposes a bill that says illegals can't vote. I guess he's looking for additional votes since he doesn't have his own party's votes anymore. But passing the SAVE Act is important to ensure the integrity of the vote, because every American citizen ought to know that when they vote, their vote is not going to be nullified by someone here illegally voting when they're not supposed to. Why not have a safeguard to ensure that only American citizens vote in America's elections? And so that's what this important bill is going to do that Chip Roy is bringing forward. A lot of work went into this by a lot of people to make sure that this bill achieves that purpose, that we protect the integrity of the vote well in advance of the election that's coming up in November. And I think you're going to see active participation by millions of Americans, maybe record numbers of Americans who are going to be voting in this election, because so much is on the line. So much for hardworking families who are struggling under this failed Biden agenda, who cannot afford another 4 years of Joe Biden's America. They know that President Trump can deliver a better America because he's already done it, and he's ready to do it again. And we're going to also, by the way, protect the integrity of women's sports. We're bringing Mary Miller's CRA that reverses a Biden-era regulation that eviscerates Title IX. President Biden wants to get rid of women's sports, getting rid of women's locker rooms. And so we're going to have an opportunity for everybody to go on record and say, do they protect and stand up for women's sports? We're bringing that bill this week as well as some other bills, too. So we're going to continue doing our work here in the House while Democrats are in disarray trying to figure out how to undermine their own democratically elected nominee for president. We are united behind Donald Trump. We're proud to be going to Milwaukee next week to help not only formally nominate, but set the stage to elect Donald Trump as the 47th president of the United States. And now our speaker, Mike Johnson.
God bless each and every one of you. I'm House Majority Leader Steve Scalise from the great state of Louisiana. Now, I was born in New Orleans, so I've seen some crazy things in my time. But New Orleans has nothing on Washington, D.C. these past 4 years. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have spent your tax dollars trashing America's finances in ways no sane or sober-minded person ever would. Let's talk energy. They've eroded the American energy dominance that President Trump delivered. Joe Biden approved the Nord Stream pipeline for Russia
but he killed the Keystone Pipeline here at home. Thousands of American jobs gone. It doesn't end there. Biden let Iran and Venezuela export their oil, but he stopped liquefied natural gas exports here in America. President Biden's not done. President Biden waived taxes on Chinese solar panels, but he raised taxes on Americans. When we elect Donald Trump as our next president and expand our Republican House majority, we will end the Democrats' assault on American energy once and for all. Now let's look at taxes. Biden and Harris want a $5 trillion tax hike. In our first 100 days, President Trump and a Republican majority will make the Trump tax cuts permanent. And yes, we will end taxes on tips and deliver another tax cut for working families. On the border, Biden and Harris opened it up to the entire world. Prisons are being emptied. President Trump and a Republican majority will repass H.R. 2, the strongest border security bill in decades. We will lock down the border, and yes, we will finish building the wall. On voting, our most sacred right as citizens, voting. Biden and Harris want illegals to vote now that they've opened up the border. Republicans will repass the SAVE Act to block illegal aliens from voting in our elections. On foreign policy, Biden and Harris brought us weakness and war. President Trump and a Republican majority will begin rebuilding our military and will end the woke indoctrination in its ranks. We will restore American power and peace. On education, Biden and Harris oppose school choice. They actually investigated parents at school boards. President Trump and a Republican majority will pass legislation expanding school choice and will repass the Parents' Bill of Rights. Parents should be free to choose what their children are taught and where. Now, lastly, I need to say something about Saturday's attempt on President Trump's life. Many of you know I was the survivor of a politically motivated shooting in 2017. Not many know that while I was fighting for my life, Donald Trump was one of the first to come console my family at the hospital. That's the kind of leader he is. Courageous under fire. Compassionate towards others. Let's put Donald Trump back in the White House this November so we can make America great again. God bless you. May Donald Trump continue to receive God's blessing, and God bless these great United States of America.
Well, I applaud the work that the whip has done on this legislation we're bringing to the floor this week. We have two bills that are limiting the ability for unelected bureaucrats in Washington to control digital currency. It's becoming more and more popular amongst people, not just here in the United States, but around the world, who believe in the dollar as a strong way to fund things, as a strong way to conduct commerce. But if they want to have digital currency, they don't want to have the government tracking their transactions. And it's important that we make it clear with these bills that we're bringing to the floor this week that that's what the rules of the game will be going forward.
and it puts limitations on the Biden administration's desire to control those transactions and track people's spending habits. And you've seen it over and over again by this Biden administration. By the way, the same Biden administration that is trying to double the size of the IRS to go and target people that are making well under $100,000 and force them to pay more in taxes, even when they're already paying more than their fair share. President Biden wants to get more from them by doubling the size of the IRS. So needless to say, we're going to continue to fight for those consumers, bringing bills like this to the floor. Another bill we're bringing to the floor this week would prevent people here illegally from voting in D.C. elections. This is something that the D.C. Council passed a few years ago to create an ability for people here illegally to vote in elections. If you look at this massive flow of illegals coming into our country, still to this day because of President Biden's open border, we've seen millions of people come into our country illegal. Minimum number is 8 million. It could be well above that number. People on the terrorist watch list coming into our country. You know, why should somebody at the Russian embassy be able to vote in elections here in the United States of America? Yet that is what is allowed today. We have a bill that says no, that's not the case. If somebody from Russia or from China working at the embassy in China wants to vote, they can vote in their own country's elections. They shouldn't be able, as a citizen of China, be able to vote in America's elections, for goodness sakes. And that's something I think most Americans agree with. We're going to find out who here in Congress agrees with that when we have a vote on that bill tomorrow. Something that we have been united against is not only the growing anti-Semitism and the growing movement against Israel's right to self-defense, which we have strongly supported, but now you see the International Criminal Court trying to arrest the Prime Minister of Israel for defending his country against a terrorist organization who on October 7th engaged war in barbaric ways against the people of Israel. This is a rogue agency. I know this majority has taken many steps against it. We're going to continue to take actions. But we also are calling on our friends around the world that are helping fund the ICC to stop funding an organization that has become heavily anti-Israel, would ultimately be anti-American too, if they had that opportunity. Somebody who would probably talk more about that is our speaker, Mike Johnson.